Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election, specifically in the state of North Carolina. This is because of a poll that came out from Survey USA yesterday. So we'll be talking about the state, talking about the path to victory for both candidates, and why North Carolina could be a very interesting state to watch come November, and why Donald Trump cannot afford to lose it. So let's get into it. Our main story concerns a poll from Survey USA. As I mentioned, this is an A-plus rated pollster, so they have a very good track record. And they had Kamala Harris at 49%, Donald Trump at 46%. So Harris is up by 3%, which is on its own nothing to sneeze at. Again, usually when you have a poll and you're up by 1, it can kind of be within the margin of error, even 2%. But once you get into 2.5%, 3%, 4%, that is a lead that is definitely worth talking about. And this is the best state poll for Kamala Harris, I would say, in weeks. Again, this is a state that Joe Biden lost by 1.3% in 2020. It's been a swing state in recent years, but Democrats haven't been able to get over the hump. They've lost this state in every presidential election since 2008. So it's always been close, but Democrats have been on the losing side of it more often than not. And so the fact that Kamala Harris is up by 3% in this state, despite the fact that Democrats haven't found success here recently, that's a very good sign for her. Now, just to kind of talk about the polling overall right now, if we take a look at the 538 average, as we can see, Kamala Harris today has a lead of 0.3%. She's at 46.4, Donald Trump just under 46.2. As we can see, the most recent polling data is good for her. She leads by 3 in Quinnipiac. She leads by 3 in Survey USA. She's tied in Morning Consult. And then if we look at some of the GOP-aligned polls that have done this race, like Insider Advantage, they only had Donald Trump up by 1. In Patriot polling, this is I'd say kind of more of an amateur poll. I think it's run by a couple of high school students, and I'm all for polling being done by people in high school. Hey, I've been running this channel for 4 years. What am I, to criticize someone young giving political predictions? But again, this poll is not the same quality as when you get from Quinnipiac, Morning Consult, or Survey USA. And this is a Republican-aligned poll. But they only had Trump up by 3, really less than that. And, of course, what's interesting is that we see a similar thing with SoCal Strategies, where they actually only have Trump up by 4. I think this is a fine result for Trump, but it would have been better for him if he was up by more. But this is actually a decent result. But the most recent, the high-quality nonpartisan polling we have 2 Harris leads, 1 tie, 0 leads for Trump in the past few days. The last poll he led in was from FAU on September 5th, which is actually a decent pollster, but they're not as good as Quinnipiac, Morning Consult, or Survey USA. So Harris has momentum here. This is something to watch because, again, if North Carolina, just to kind of talk about this for a second, because I don't know why it's letting me, here we go. If North Carolina goes blue, and I'll show you the map in a second, but it'll be very difficult for Trump to win if he loses North Carolina. But before we talk about what could potentially happen if North Carolina does vote for Kamala Harris, let's just talk about the legitimacy of these polls, because again, North Carolina is a state where Democrats have been kind of misled by the polls. In 2020, this was true, and again, on election day, Joe Biden led by 1.8%. He lost by 1.3%, so he did about 3% worse on election day than his polls had predicted. And Kamala Harris, obviously, if she did 3 points worse, she'll lose by 2.5. So obviously, if there's a polling miss that is the same as we saw in 2020, Trump will still win North Carolina. But again, let's think about this very deeply. And we have to consider a lot when we think about the polls, because a lot of people like to just apply the same polling miss every election, and it proves them very wrong. In 2022, a lot of people thought Republicans were going to have a red wave because they applied the 2020 polling miss, which underestimated Republicans, to the 2022 polls. But in 2022, in most cases, we saw Democrats outperform their polls. So polling miss one cycle doesn't mean anything for polling miss next cycle. Let's think about this, right? If I'm running a poll, and in 2020, I was very wrong. I had Joe Biden winning Florida by 4, North Carolina by 2, and he was tied in Texas. I overestimated Democrats all across the board. Let's just say that happened to my poll. Obviously, that did not happen, but let's just say that happened, right? The next cycle, am I not going to change anything? Of course not. I was wrong, so I'm obviously going to change something. And what I'm likely to do is actually overcorrect. I'm likely to say, hey, look, if I miss twice in a row the same direction, people are going to start to say that I'm biased. And so I'm going to actually overcorrect. What I'm likely going to do is I'm going to try to create a more Republican-friendly sample in my polls. That way, I'm, being super sure that I don't get the same Democratic miss. In 2022, we saw that polls started, counting the people, especially phone polls. In 2020, they didn't count this, but in 2020, there were a lot of people who said they were going to vote for Trump, then hung up before they can answer the other questions, right? And polls ask you a bunch of questions. They ask you things from what your age is, what your race is, to who you're voting for governor, and even some polls will ask you how long have you held your driver's license, or what's your favorite movie in their political polls, right? So obviously, not all people want to go through the process of doing the poll, but we saw that people who supported Trump were less likely to do it than people who supported Biden in the polls. And then in 2022 and in this year as well, polls started counting that. They started saying, hey, look, we had a bad polling miss in both 2016 and 2020. We're going to count those people who say they're going to vote for Trump then hang up. We're just going to, do other things to weight our sample for that. So that's what you have to consider, is that the polls are fundamentally different from what they were in 2020. In 2022, the polls were broadly decent, but in many cases, they actually underestimated Democrats, not Republicans. So again, you can take the 2020 polling miss and say Harris is still going to lose North Carolina. I'm fine with that prediction, by the way, but it's likely to be very wrong because the polls change every cycle. And because if we look at the polls this year, they show a very, realistic result. In 2020, we had polls that had Biden winning Wisconsin by 17 and had him winning Florida by 8, right? That was never going to happen. This year, I think the polls are a lot more grounded. There's some problems with them, but they are a lot more grounded, and they show an electoral map that is a lot more realistic. So those are my thoughts on the polls. Again, I'm happy to answer questions in the comments, but that is what we should think about the polls. So let's talk about the electoral map now that we have at least some basis for, believing these polls are taking them seriously. I'd say that, as we all know, there's 219 electoral votes that are very likely to go to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. There's 226 that are very likely to go for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And so we have 7 states, 93 votes between them that are going to really decide this election. So let's say Survey USA, A+ Pollster, let's say they're right. Let's say Harrison's North Carolina by 3, right? So she's at 242. And from there, it's very easy for her to win because all she would need is, again, a couple more states. So Michigan, I think, is also pretty easy for her. And by easy, I don't mean she's guaranteed to win it, but I think of these 7 states, it's by far her best. And then from there, she would need 2 more states. So what's interesting is that if she wins Arizona and Nevada, she's the president. If she wins Arizona and Pennsylvania, she's the president. So she has a lot of paths. But again, winning North Carolina and Michigan on its own is not enough, right? So she still needs to win 3 of these states, or 2 more states, depending on what states they are, right? So that's the thing with North Carolina. But I think North Carolina is more effective for Democrats as kind of a defense against Trump, because Donald Trump, everyone knows Donald Trump is targeting 3 states to get to 270, right? Because right now he's losing in Nevada, he's losing in Wisconsin, he's losing in Michigan, if you believe the polls. He's winning in Arizona, which is good for him, but I think Republicans have a huge geography problem there that I've talked extensively about, and I'll keep talking about, that makes Arizona challenging for Trump. But it doesn't matter, right? Like, he can lose all these states, but as long as he wins these East Coast states, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, he's the president. And that's obviously, would be an incredibly close election result, right? In 2020, actually, this wouldn't have been possible because the electoral votes have shifted into the red states. Florida, Texas, North Carolina gained electoral votes, whereas Michigan, New York, California lost electoral votes. So that's why, in 2020, if you ran this map, Biden would have still won 270, whereas this time Harris is down to 268. So that's an interesting thing about the Electoral College. But regardless, Trump just needs Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. But if he loses North Carolina, that strategy's out the window, and he needs to win back. Not only does he need to win back, potentially Nevada, he'd also need one more. He'd need Wisconsin, Michigan, or Arizona. Or if he didn't win Nevada, and if you believe the polls, and he won Arizona, he'd still be losing. He would still need one of these Rust Belt states. So now you can see why this is a problem for Trump, because again, if he loses North Carolina, he can't rely on just Georgia and Pennsylvania to get him over the finish line. He needs to cut into states where Harris is winning in the polls. And again, Pennsylvania, I'm giving to him. Right now, he's still down in the polls there by but a point. So if you believe the polls right now, this is the electoral map you're looking at, where, and I actually think Georgia, Harris might have a lead in the polls. It goes back every day. It's so close. Actually, no, Harris is down by 0.5. Never mind. But, she was up, to be fair, she was up literally yesterday. So I don't think it's that crazy to, not know that. But again, this is the electoral map. If you believe the polling averages right now, and assuming Harris wins North Carolina, Trump would need Pennsylvania, and on top of that, to win Nevada, to win Michigan, or to win Wisconsin. So this is why this state is a huge challenge for Donald. It's a huge challenge for Donald Trump if he loses this state. Now, if we get an election night call earlier on in the night where Harris looks like she's going to win North Carolina, the election's not over. The state isn't big enough. It's not like Florida where if Trump loses, it's a Little League ball game, right? But this is a state that Republicans do, have a hard time winning without. And so if we get a call for Harris, or it looks like Harris is going to win North Carolina on election night, that will be very, that'll be a sign that the Trump campaign is in very dire straits, right? And so that is going to be an interesting thing to watch for. And Survey USA, the fact this is one of the best pollsters in the country, I think a top 5 pollster for certain, A+ rated, doing a state poll. And again, they did this poll 3 weeks ago, and they had a tie. So they've showed movement towards Harris in the past couple of weeks here. She leads by 3%. She's outside the margin of error. And if she wins North Carolina, it'll be very difficult for her to lose this election. So let me know what you all think. Let me know what you expect out of North Carolina come November. Comment down suggestions below. If you're a member, I will get to your suggestion immediately. But if you're not a member, no worries. Comment down your suggestion, and I'll hopefully get to it soon. Subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already, and I'll see you all tomorrow.